It was a sunny afternoon when Moussa Traoré stepped up to the podium at the Economic Forum. The room was filled with leaders, business people, and journalists, all eager to hear the latest ideas on how to improve the country's struggling economy. Moussa wasn't a politician or a famous business tycoon. He was a young, relatively unknown economist who had spent years working in the rural areas, helping local farmers and small businesses. Today, he was about to present his boldest idea yet. As he began speaking, his voice was steady but full of passion. He spoke of connecting rural villages to major cities with solar-powered transport hubs. "We have roads, but they're often poor or non-existent," he explained. "Our rural areas are isolated, and it's hurting our economy. By bringing sustainable, solar-powered transportation to these regions, we can open up new markets and help businesses thrive." He outlined how his plan would create jobs, reduce transportation costs, and bring clean energy to areas that had never seen it before. Some in the room nodded in agreement, impressed by the clarity of his idea, but others looked more skeptical. The Prime Minister, who was seated near the front, seemed distracted. He was a man known for his focus on big, flashy projects and large-scale infrastructure. Moussa's proposal, while innovative, seemed small compared to the government's usual mega-plans. It wasn't the kind of idea that would grab headlines. When Moussa finished, the room fell silent for a moment. The Prime Minister, Doumbia, cleared his throat and smiled politely. "Thank you, Mr. Traoré," he said, his tone formal. "We will review your proposal and get back to you." Then, without another word, he turned his attention back to the next speaker, a high-ranking businessman who was discussing a multi-billion-dollar factory deal. The attention in the room quickly shifted away from Moussa, leaving him standing at the podium feeling somewhat deflated. After the event, Moussa tried to approach the Prime Minister, hoping for a brief conversation to discuss his idea in more detail, but his attempts were met with cold indifference. "We have a lot on our plate right now," the Prime Minister's assistant said dismissively. "Maybe try again in a few months." Disappointed but not defeated, Moussa returned to his office, where he sat in front of his computer. He reread the proposal over and over, tweaking the details, ensuring everything was in place. He couldn't shake the feeling that his idea could make a real difference, especially for the people living in the most isolated parts of the country. But how could he get anyone to listen when the government wasn't interested? Moussa knew the challenge he faced. His plan wasn't glamorous, and it didn't promise quick, flashy results. But it was practical, achievable, and it could bring real change to millions of people who had been forgotten by the government. Yet, as the days passed, it seemed that the doors to power would remain closed to him. But he wasn't going to give up. He had a vision, and he believed in it, enough to keep pushing for it, even if no one else did. Little did he know, someone else was about to notice his idea, someone who might be able to do more than just listen. Weeks passed after the Economic Forum, and Moussa Traoré's hopes started to fade. The Prime Minister's cold response lingered in his mind, making him wonder if he would ever be taken seriously. He had sent follow-up emails, made phone calls, and even reached out through a few influential friends. Each time, he was told the same thing: "We will get back to you soon." But soon never came. It wasn't that the idea was bad. Moussa was sure of that. He had worked with engineers and local communities to design a plan that could truly help rural areas. The solar-powered transport hubs would provide jobs, boost local economies, and make life easier for people who struggled every day with poor roads and long distances. His plan wasn't just a dream. It was a practical, well-researched solution. Yet the government, focused on other large-scale projects, just didn't see it. Moussa's frustration grew, but so did his determination. He refused to let the idea die just because the Prime Minister wasn't interested. He believed in it too much to give up. So instead of waiting for the government's approval, he decided to continue his work on the proposal on his own. He reached out to small companies that might be interested in the technology. He started talking to local farmers and business owners to get their input. They were excited about the idea, even though they knew it would take time to implement. It wasn't just about transportation. It was about bringing change to places that had been left behind. While he worked on the project, Moussa found himself growing closer to the communities he had been helping. He spent time with the people, listening to their stories and learning about their struggles. He saw firsthand the challenges they faced, how hard it was to get basic supplies or reach the nearest town. It made him even more determined to find a way to help. One day, while working on a new version of his proposal, Musa received a call. It was a man he didn't know, someone with a voice that sounded both curious and urgent. The man introduced himself as Seydou Konaté, a rising political figure who had been watching the forum from the sidelines. He had heard about Musa's plan and wanted to meet. Musa was cautious at first. He had no idea why a politician would be interested in his idea. After all, the government had already rejected it. But Seydou Konaté's reputation was growing fast. He was known for being an outspoken critic of the current administration, calling for more practical solutions to the country's problems. Konaté believed in empowering the people, not just relying on big businesses or expensive projects. They agreed to meet at a small cafe in the city, away from the media attention. When Musa arrived, he was greeted by Konaté's warm handshake and sincere smile. The politician seemed genuinely interested in what he had to say. "I've been following your work, Musa," Konaté said. "The government may have ignored you, but that doesn't mean your idea isn't valuable. In fact, I think it could be the foundation for something bigger, something the people really need." For the first time in weeks, Musa felt a spark of hope. He had been ignored by the people in power, but maybe, just maybe, this was the start of a new opportunity. Konaté didn't just want to listen to his idea. He wanted to do something about it. "I believe this can change things," Konaté continued. "I want to help you get it off the ground, but I can't do it alone. I need you on my team." Musa hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He didn't know what the future held, but this was a chance he couldn't pass up. At that moment, he realized that the door to change wasn't closed. It had just opened in a different direction. And so, their partnership began. After meeting with Seydou Konaté, Musa Traoré felt a renewed sense of purpose. He could see that Konaté was different from the government leaders who had dismissed his ideas. Konaté was a man of action, not just words. While others in power were content with discussing problems, Konaté was eager to solve them. Musa worked closely with Konaté and his team, refining the details of the solar-powered transport hubs. They discussed how the project could be scaled up, how to gather resources, and how to involve local communities in the process. Konaté knew that this idea could help him stand out in the upcoming election, but he also believed that it was the right thing to do for the people. However, the more Musa worked with Konaté, the more he began to realize the political game at play. Konaté was not just looking for a solution to the country's problems. He was positioning himself as the alternative to the current leadership. While the government had ignored the needs of rural areas, Konaté was making those same areas his priority. He was tapping into the frustrations of everyday people who felt neglected by the government. News of the partnership between Musa and Konaté quickly spread. The media caught wind of the innovative plan and started to report on it. What was once a quiet proposal had now become the subject of heated discussions. People in the streets, in markets, and in villages started talking about the idea. They could see the potential for real change. The plan wasn't just another empty promise. It was something tangible, something they could touch and feel. This idea could bring the country closer together, and they were eager to be part of it. But not everyone was happy about the rising popularity of Konaté and Musa's project. Prime Minister Doumbia, the leader of the current government, began to feel the pressure. The Prime Minister had always prided himself on being the voice of reason and stability, but his administration's inability to address basic needs was beginning to show. Musa's idea had gained too much attention, and Doumbia's government was now on the defensive. Musa knew that the Prime Minister and his allies would not take kindly to Konaté's rise. Doumbia had long controlled the political scene, and he wasn't about to let a rival take his place without a fight. The Prime Minister began to discredit Konaté, accusing him of trying to undermine the government and steal credit for something that was never truly his. Behind closed doors, Doumbia's advisors scrambled to find a way to diminish Konaté's influence. Meanwhile, in public, Konaté remained calm. He knew that in politics, challenges like these were inevitable. But the more Doumbia attacked, the stronger his support grew. People were beginning to see through the government's tactics. It wasn't just about political rivalry. It was about who had the best solutions for the country's future. One evening, after a particularly tense exchange between Konaté and Doumbia on national television, Moussa and Konaté sat together in Konad's office. They watched the news coverage, feeling the weight of what was happening. The media was full of talk about the upcoming election, with Konad's name often in the headlines. "They're scared," Konad said, his eyes never leaving the screen. "They know that the people are looking for something new, and they can see that we're offering it to them. We just have to keep pushing forward." Moussa nodded, a sense of responsibility weighing heavily on him. It was no longer just about a project. It was about the future of the country. Konad wasn't just fighting for power, he was fighting for change. "We'll keep pushing," Moussa said firmly. "We'll show them that this country can do better." As the days passed, it became clear that the battle wasn't just about a new proposal. It was about an entire system. Moussa and Konaté were no longer just presenting an idea. They were building a movement that could change the course of the nation's future. The night of the televised panel was a turning point that no one could have predicted. Seydou Konaté had been invited to appear on the popular national news show to discuss his political platform, but he decided to bring Moussa Traoré with him. It was the perfect opportunity to showcase the solar-powered transport hubs and show the country how serious he was about bringing change. The studio was bright and buzzing with energy. Cameras were rolling, and the audience was packed with journalists, political analysts, and everyday citizens who had tuned in to hear the latest developments. As Konaté and Moussa sat across from the host, the tension in the air was thick. The topic of the evening was supposed to be about economic growth and the country's future. But for Konaté, it was more than just another interview. This was a chance to present an idea that could reshape the country. Moussa felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. He had spoken at conferences before, but never like this. His words would now be broadcasted to millions. The stakes were higher than ever, but he knew this was a chance to make people listen, to show them the potential of his plan. The host began with a few general questions about Konad's vision for the future. He asked about policies, growth strategies, and the direction the country needed to take. Konad responded confidently, speaking about the need for more local jobs, better access to education, and a focus on clean energy. But it was when he turned to Moussa that the conversation truly began to shift. "Moussa," the host said, "you've been working on a proposal that some are calling the future of our country's economy. Tell us more about your plan." Moussa took a deep breath and began to speak. "Thank you for the opportunity. My proposal is simple but powerful. We have rural areas that are isolated, with poor infrastructure, limited access to markets, and very few resources. What I propose is a network of solar-powered transport hubs that connect these areas to larger cities. This system would provide sustainable energy, create jobs, and give local businesses a chance to thrive. It's not a pipe dream. It's something we can start building right now." The room was silent for a moment. The host seemed impressed, and so did the audience. Moussa continued, explaining the specific details of the plan, how the solar hubs would be built, how local communities would be trained to maintain them, and how it could help reduce transportation costs in the long term. He spoke with such clarity and passion that even the most skeptical viewers couldn't ignore the logic behind the idea. After Moussa finished, Konaté leaned forward and added, "This is not just about an idea, it's about real people. It's about the families living in remote villages who struggle every day to get food, supplies, or even basic health care. This plan isn't about a quick fix, it's about lasting change." The host turned to the camera. "This is certainly an ambitious proposal, but there are many who say that projects like this are too expensive or too difficult to implement. How do you respond to that?" Konaté smiled. "We can't afford not to try. We've been stuck in a cycle of inaction for too long. While others talk about grand plans, we're showing the people that change is possible. We will start small, build together, and prove that this works." The conversation went on, and the energy in the room began to shift. Instead of focusing on the typical political bickering, the panel was now discussing solutions. The media picked up on this and started spreading the message. Soon, social media was abuzz with support for the plan. People who had never heard of Moussa Traoré or Seydou Konaté before were now talking about the solar-powered transport hubs. Moussa could hardly believe what he was seeing. Just days ago, his proposal had been ignored by the government, dismissed as an afterthought. Now, it was at the center of a national conversation. The idea was no longer just his. It belonged to the people, and the momentum was only growing stronger. Konaté turned to Moussa and whispered, "We're just getting started." The unexpected success of the televised broadcast left many in the government scrambling. Prime Minister Doumbia, who had been too busy with bigger projects to pay attention to Moussa Traoré's idea, now found himself in a very difficult position. His once unchallenged leadership was under threat, and it was becoming more obvious every day. Doumbia had built his career on big promises: factories, large infrastructure projects, and international investment deals that sounded good on paper but often took too long to deliver. He was a man who liked control, and he wasn't used to things slipping out of his grasp. When Moussa's solar-powered transport hub proposal, backed by Konaté, began to attract so much attention, it was a reminder that people were no longer content with slow, empty promises. They wanted change, and they wanted it now. Behind closed doors, Doumbia's advisors worked tirelessly to figure out how to take back the narrative. They quickly realized that ignoring the proposal was no longer an option. Moussa and Konaté had made the issue too visible, and public opinion was shifting. In a panic, Doumbia called an emergency meeting with his top officials. The mood in the room was tense. No one had an answer to the growing support for Konaté's ideas. "We need to do something, and fast," Doumbia said, rubbing his temples. "If we don't respond to this proposal, we'll lose control. People are talking about Konaté like he's already president. He's stealing the spotlight." One of his advisors, a seasoned political strategist named Sarah, spoke up. "We can't just ignore it, but we also can't let Konaté look like the hero. We need to act, and we need to do it soon." They discussed several ideas. Most of them involved taking credit for some of the elements of Moussa's plan, claiming that it had always been part of the government's vision. They would need to find a way to twist the narrative, to make it seem as though the Prime Minister's office had been working on similar projects all along. "We can't afford to look like we're behind," Doumbia said, his voice sharp. "We need to show that we've been planning something just as big, something more impressive." Meanwhile, across the city, Konaté and Moussa were meeting with local business leaders and community organizers. They had already started gathering support for a pilot version of the project, with plans to implement the first solar-powered transport hubs in rural regions. The response from local communities had been overwhelmingly positive. People saw this as a chance to change their lives, to create real economic opportunities for their families. Back in the government offices, Doumbia was becoming increasingly frustrated. He couldn't believe how quickly Konaté had gained momentum. The media was now buzzing with stories about the people's candidate and the revolutionary plan that would change the country's future. It felt like Konaté had snatched the spotlight from under his nose, and there was nothing he could do about it. In one final attempt to regain control, Doumbia held a press conference. The cameras were flashing as he stepped up to the podium. His face was tight with frustration, but he tried to smile and look calm. "We've heard the concerns of the people," he began, "and we want to assure you that the government has always been committed to improving infrastructure across the country. We've already been working on similar projects, and we will continue to find new solutions to help rural communities." But his words fell flat. The public was no longer impressed by the same old rhetoric. They had seen the flashy promises before and were no longer willing to wait. Konaté's plan had captured their imagination, and they weren't going to let it go. The next day, social media was filled with reactions to Doumbia's press conference. People were pointing out the clear differences between his approach and Konaté's. It was becoming more and more clear that the Prime Minister's grip on power was slipping, and Konaté, with Moussa's help, was ready to take advantage of it. As the pressure mounted, Doumbia knew that time was running out. He had to find a way to turn the tide, or risk losing everything. With the pressure on him growing every day, Prime Minister Doumbia realized that he couldn't continue playing catch-up. The government's response to Konaté's rise was falling flat, and people were beginning to lose faith in the promises of the current administration. If he didn't do something drastic soon, the government could lose the next election. He needed to act fast, and he needed a plan. While Konaté's movement was gaining ground in the rural areas, Doumbia's team decided to focus on urban centers, where their support was still strong. They would launch a new initiative, promising even bigger infrastructure projects. designed to capture the public's attention and shift focus away from Conat's solar-powered transport hubs. It was the same old strategy, but now they needed to make it look new, shiny, and powerful. Doumbia held a press conference to announce his plans. He spoke about expanding high-speed rail lines, building massive new shopping malls, and attracting international companies to invest in the country's cities. The crowd seemed impressed, and the media covered it widely. Doumbia was hoping that this would win back the public's favor and distract them from Conat's more grounded, practical ideas. But while Doumbia was busy announcing grand projects, Konate and Moussa were deep in discussions about their next steps. They knew that while the Prime Minister played the game of big promises, they had to focus on what truly mattered to the people, the future of rural communities. "We can't compete with their shiny new plans," Konat said, looking over some documents. "But we don't need to. We have something they can't replicate: trust, connection, and a real plan that will impact lives." Moussa nodded in agreement. They were building something stronger than just an election platform. They were building a movement. The people didn't need flashy buildings or expensive projects. They needed jobs, better access to goods, and the ability to live better lives. They decided to visit more rural areas, directly speaking to people who had been affected by the lack of proper transportation and infrastructure. It wasn't about speeches or promises. It was about showing up, listening to their stories, and giving them hope. The people had seen too many politicians talk about change without ever delivering. Now they were finally hearing something they believed in. On their visits, they would stand in the middle of busy village markets and talk to farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers. They explained how the solar-powered hubs would help businesses thrive and how it would be a starting point for a better future. Slowly, they built up support from the ground level. Meanwhile, Doumbia was becoming more anxious. Despite the urban initiatives, the rural vote was slipping away, and Konate's influence was growing stronger every day. The young politician and Moussa's ideas were turning into a real threat. Doumbia's advisors kept warning him that Konate was no longer just a competitor. He was a movement. Realizing he had underestimated his rival, Doumbia began to change his approach. He decided to make a big move. He would announce his own version of the solar-powered transport hubs, but he wouldn't do it alone. He would tie the project to an alliance with a major international company, promising even more advanced technology and faster results than Konat's plan. It was a risky move, but Doumbia was desperate. If he could somehow steal the idea and make it seem like his own, he could turn the tide in his favor. He hoped that by attaching global support and big business to the project, he could convince the public that his plan was the better option. News of Doumbia's new initiative spread quickly, and the media buzzed with excitement. Many thought that Konate had finally been outmaneuvered, but Konate wasn't backing down. He knew that the heart of the project wasn't about big corporations. It was about real people, and that's where his strength lay. As the battle for support intensified, Moussa stood alongside Konate, confident that their vision would win in the end. They didn't need to play the game of flashy promises. They had something more powerful: the trust of the people. And that, they both knew, was where true change began. The election was getting closer, and the battle between Prime Minister Doumbia and Sédhiou Konate was reaching a boiling point. The media was full of reports, debates, and promises from both sides. The country was divided, and everyone was eagerly waiting to see who would come out on top. The people had started to pick sides. Some still supported the government's flashy projects, while others had joined Konat's movement, hoping for something more real and lasting. Despite the growing tensions, Konate remained calm. He knew that he couldn't compete with Doumbia's flashy promises of international investment and massive urban projects. Instead, he focused on the core of his campaign: the solar-powered transport hubs, which represented a chance to truly change the lives of the people in rural areas. He and Moussa continued to visit villages, listening to the struggles of the farmers, shopkeepers, and families who lived in places cut off from the rest of the country. The more they listened, the stronger their belief in the project grew. The solar hubs were not just a solution to transportation. It was a way to bring people together, to give them opportunities they had been denied for years. It was about hope, about showing the country that change was possible. Konate's supporters were growing in number. More and more people were speaking out, sharing their experiences and excitement about the potential of the transport hubs. Farmers, who had been forced to travel long distances just to sell their crops, began to see the possibilities of better roads, easier access to markets, and even affordable transportation to medical centers. For the first time, they felt like their voices were being heard. But Prime Minister Doumbia wasn't giving up. He had launched his own version of the solar-powered hubs, with promises of international companies stepping in to make the project bigger and faster. His message was clear. CONAT's plan was too small, too local. Doumbia's version, he said, would be on a grander scale, and it would come with the support of the world's most advanced technology. Yet, as the weeks passed, more and more people began to question Doumbia's approach. They could see through the government's attempt to steal CONAT's idea and make it seem like their own. The focus on international business and high-tech solutions felt distant from the everyday struggles of rural communities. People were tired of empty promises and wanted something they could believe in. They wanted to see real progress. On the night before the election, CONAT's campaign team gathered for one final push. The tension in the air was thick, but there was also a sense of hope. Everyone knew that the next day could change everything. The volunteers, the local leaders, and the supporters had worked hard, speaking to anyone who would listen. Now they just had to wait and see if their message had reached enough people. Musa, who had become a close ally to CONAT, sat quietly in a corner, reflecting on how far they had come. Just a few months ago, no one had taken his proposal seriously. Now, it had become the centerpiece of a national movement. He thought about the long days of travel, the countless hours of meetings, and the hard work that had gone into spreading the word. It was all worth it, knowing that tomorrow, the people would decide their future. The election results started to come in early the next morning. The numbers were close, but the excitement in the air was undeniable. CONAT's supporters gathered in the streets, anxiously waiting for the final tally. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about hope, about changing the country for the better. As the final results were announced, a cheer erupted across the nation. Seydou Konaté had won. The people had spoken, and they had chosen change. It was a victory for the rural communities, for Musa's vision, and for the future of the country. Konaté had proven that with the right ideas, the right people, and the courage to challenge the system, anything was possible. Now, the real work would begin. The country was ready for a new chapter, and Konaté was determined to lead them there. The victory was sweet, but Seydou Konaté knew the real work was just beginning. As the new leader of the country, he now had to fulfill the promises he had made to the people. The solar-powered transport hubs were just the start of his vision for the future. Konaté had spent months building trust with the citizens, and now it was time to show them that their faith in him had been well placed. The first step was to meet with his advisors and form a strong team that would help turn his vision into reality. He wanted people who were as committed as he was to making real changes, not just talking about them. He also called Moussa Traoré to help lead the project. Moussa had become an essential part of his team, and Konaté knew that the solar hubs would need his expertise and passion to succeed. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us," Konaté said to his team during their first meeting in the new government offices. "But I believe in this plan. I believe in the people of this country. We're going to make sure that every village has access to the tools and resources they need to grow." Moussa nodded, already starting to make plans for how to launch the first hub in a rural community. They discussed the logistics, how to get solar panels and equipment to the villages, and how to train local people to maintain the hubs. It was a huge task, but it was also an exciting one. The team knew they were part of something bigger than just a project. It was a movement that could change lives for the better. In the following weeks, the team worked tirelessly. They held meetings with local businesses, non-governmental organizations, and even international partners who were willing to help fund the project. As the plan started to take shape, the first solar-powered hub was built in a small village on the outskirts of the country. It wasn't a massive structure, but it was a start. The villagers gathered to celebrate the opening, and the excitement was palpable. The solar panels started working, providing power for the transport system, and the new routes allowed farmers to travel to bigger markets with less hassle. The effect on the village was immediate. Local businesses grew, people began earning better wages, and the children were able to attend school with more ease. It was clear that the project was making the difference. As word spread, other rural communities began to request their own hubs. The demand was overwhelming, but Konaté and his team were ready. They knew that this was only the beginning, and with each hub they built, they were creating a foundation for a more connected, prosperous country. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Doumbia, who had once dismissed Konaté's ideas, was now struggling to maintain his influence. His flashy promises had failed to impress the people, and now his hold on power was slipping. He had watched as Konaté's movement grew, but he had underestimated the power of real change. Doumbia's response to Konaté's success was to criticize the solar hubs, calling them too small and impractical. But it was too late. The people had already made their decision, and they were no longer interested in empty promises. With each passing day, Konaté's popularity grew, and his leadership became stronger. He wasn't just a politician. He was a symbol of hope. His dedication to the people had earned their trust, and now they were ready to follow him as he worked to rebuild the country. As the months passed, the country started to change. The solar-powered hubs grew in number, and more people had access to education, healthcare, and business opportunities. Konaté had proven that change was possible, that small steps could lead to big results. His vision for a better future was becoming a reality, one hub at a time. The country was finally on a path to progress, and Konaté knew that this was just the beginning. There was still much to be done, but the future was brighter than ever. The people had spoken, and with their support, he was ready to lead the way forward.